Hi, this is Bill Ringle, host of the audio magazine, My Quest for the Best, where we meet business, thought, and community leaders to discuss issues relevant to entrepreneurial growth. Joining us today is Erika Andersen. Since 1980, Erika Andersen has developed a reputation for creating approaches to learning and business building that are uniquely tailored to her clients' challenges, goals, and culture. She and her colleagues at Proteus International offer practical methods and skills for individuals, teams, and companies to clarify and then achieve their hoped-for future. She's been invited to share her insights about managing people and creating successful businesses by speaking to corporations, nonprofit groups, national associations, and through quotes in a variety of national publications, including Glamour, Fortune, and the New York Times. Her clients include MTV Networks, NBC Universal, Cablevision Corporation, and many more. Erika is the author of Growing Great Employees, Turning Ordinary People into Extraordinary Performers, and also Being Strategic, Plan for Success, and Outthink Your Competitors, Stay Ahead of Change, as well as the author and host of Being Strategic with Erika Andersen. Welcome, Erika.
Hi. It's lovely to be here.
Erika, tell me, how did you come about your interest in developing extraordinary people and that led you to do the consulting work that you do today?
Oh wow, there's a long answer, a medium answer, and a short answer to that. So I'll start with the short answer. So about 30 years ago, I had the opportunity, and you and I were talking about this a little bit before we started, to start working for a guy named Tim Galway, who had just written a book a few years previously called The Inner Game of Tennis, which was really about learning. It was really about how we learn and how we get in the way of our own learning. And I just sort of, pure serendipity, sort of stumbled into that job. We had mutual friends. And that sort of started me off. I really loved the whole focus on how organizations learn and don't, and how individuals learn and don't, and what helps people be more productive and create the kinds of lives and business success they want, and what gets in the way of that. So I worked for Tim for a couple of years, and then I had the chance to work for a wonderful guy named Peter Block, who is in some ways kind of the father of organizational development in the U.S., and he hired me to turn his intellectual property into workshops. So it was sort of a 3 or 4 year on-the-job OD degree. It was really great. And then, I kept kind of following my intentions, the things that really appealed to me about that. Then I spent 5 or 6 years working as the head of instructional design for a company that did primarily management training. They hired me because they said they wanted to start an OD function, but they didn't really want to do that. So I ended up being their head of instructional design. And then in 1990, I felt like I'd always wanted to have my own business, and I felt like I had sort of paid my dues and knew where I wanted to go. So I began Proteus in 1990, and it was really from the very beginning, and you said a little bit of this in the introduction, from the very beginning the focus was helping our clients, both organizations and individuals, clarify and move toward their hoped-for future. So to help them get clear, to help our clients get clear about what it is they want to create, either the businesses they want to create or the successful lives they want to create, and then help them get clear about what would help them move in that direction. And if there were things we could offer, great, and if not, then we would hook them up with other people who would help them move in that direction.
I want to go back to that because I think that you're highlighting something that I want to underscore. Isn't part of the reason that companies have a great deal of difficulty achieving what they're wanting to accomplish is because they don't have clarity in specific important ways around what they want to accomplish?
Yes, absolutely. And so much of the work we do is around that. In fact, my second book, Being Strategic, is all about that. In fact, at the beginning of the book, as we did, we have done vision and strategy work for the 20 plus years that Proteus has existed, and as I went along, I think getting better and better at it and helping clients, I saw more and more clearly what you said, and interestingly that that there really isn't any kind of a common definition about what it means to be strategic. And so one of the things we do when we start, if we're going to do vision and strategy work with a client, we make sure there's a common definition. And I offer one at the beginning of the Being Strategic book. I say I'd like to offer to you that being strategic, that a good definition for it is consistently making those core directional choices that will best move you toward your hoped-for future. And what that implies is that you know what your hoped-for future is, that to your point, you're clear about the key elements of that future that you want to create for yourself. Because if you don't know that, if you don't know, where you're trying to go, either individually or organizationally, and have some pretty clear stakes in the ground about what success will look like, and if you don't know where you're starting from, if you don't have an accurate sense of your beginning point, then you can't, how can you make those core directional choices? It's like saying, well, I think I want to go to LA, not sure, maybe it's San Francisco, and I think I'm starting from Philadelphia, not sure, maybe it's New York. If you don't know pretty clearly your starting point and your hope for point, then it's hard to make directional choices that will get you there. Does that make sense?
It does. If somebody just takes a moment to think about how badly companies and other organizations mess up their strategical direction, it's clear that how they're missing one or more of those pieces.
I think that's exactly right. And it's one of the things I really like about that sentence is kind of like, okay, there's a lot in this sentence. It's really what you need to know. You need to know where you're starting from. You need to know where you're going to get to. You need to be able to make those core statements of intention, which is what strategy is, and then, consistency is filling them in with tactics. What are the specific things we're going to do to walk down those pathways? And to your point, if you're missing any of those key elements, then, craziness ensues, which it often does.
Tell me, who is an ideal client for you today, and what are the types of questions that are in their minds that they want to solve when they engage with you?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So ideal clientness in our minds primarily has to do with openness. If someone is really open to new ways of operating, new ways of thinking about their situation, new skills, new techniques, new models, and it's not like we have a plethora of models, but it's just if someone is open, then, it makes it 150 million times easier to work with them. So our ideal client is curious, really. We work mostly with larger companies, but we sometimes will engage with smaller companies who have a big vision, who clearly, like I just had a phone call with this guy the other day who's, one of these guys who's, sort of number 10 with a bullet. I mean, just a lovely guy, authentic, smart, and I just look at what he's done with his fairly small company over the last 5 years, and I really feel like in 20 years he's going to be making an important, imprint on the world. So sometimes we engage with those kinds of clients too.
In addition to being open and curious and having the resources, what are the things that they're struggling with that make them think, oh my gosh, we really are in over our heads or a little bit lost. We need to get this oriented. What precipitates them saying and reaching out to you and saying, we need to have a conversation to see if we could be a client of yours?
I think it comes from a variety of places, because even though our mission is very clearly this idea of helping people clarify and move toward their hopeful future, we have 3 practice areas where we work to do that, to help people in those ways. And different people come in through the different practice areas, because almost all of our new clients are word of mouth, or kind of the second level of word of mouth, which is through my books or through interviews like this. People hear of us. And so the 3 practice areas that we have, the first one we call strengthening leaders. And our premise is that, even if you're clear about your hope for future, if you don't have good, authentic leaders who can help you move in that direction, then it's probably not going to happen. So our executive coaching practice lives in that kind of practice area or bucket, and also we have a team development practice that lives in there, so that's strengthening leaders. The second area we call clarifying vision and strategy, and it's just that. It's where our vision and strategy process lives, and if people feel like, often an organization will feel like they're at an inflection point. This guy I was just talking about, his company's grown very quickly over the last 5 years or so, and they've just, taken advantage of that momentum, but now they're at a point where they want to step back and say, okay, what do we want the next 5 years to look like? And we want to be more planful about it and make sure we're making best use of our resources and building off of what we have now. So that's kind of what we do in that center bucket. And then the third one we call building skills and knowledge, and that's the training part of our business. And we have management development and team development. People can learn actual skills for managing and leadership. And my first book, Growing Great Employees, is a lot of the intellectual property from that book has found its way into skill-based training programs that we do. So people can tend to come in through one of those 3 doors, if that makes sense.
Can you give me a recent success story, someone who came to you don't have to mention names, but, give us an idea of how you work with some of the people who you help week in and week out.
A lot of what I personally do is in that vision and strategy area, and so a lot of the wonderful help we've been able to give to people, especially over the last few years, is with that. There are 5 of us in Proteus who do this vision and strategy work, and I'll give you, without, as you say, names. A lot of our clients are in the media space, and recently I have been working with a television network, which is fairly new and is sort of just out of startup phase, and they've just changed CEOs, and they're X number of years old now, and so they feel like they want to really, as I said before, be more planful about their future. And we did a little bit of diagnosis beforehand to kind of find out what exactly was happening in the organization, and then we did this 2-day vision and strategy process that we do, and it was really gratifying because everybody, I would say there were about the 12 most senior people in the company came out of that session feeling like, great, now we have a map. We know what our hope for future is. We're all on the same page with that. Those vectors are lined up. We know what's in our way. We have strategies and tactics for getting there. I have no doubt that it will really shift the way they operate and help them to be more successful going forward because they're all on the same page and they'll make better use of their resources. So that's what most often happens when we do vision strategy work with our clients. But this was particularly gratifying for me because I really love the woman who is the new CEO, and I think she's just a wonderful choice. And it was so fun to watch this team who had felt like they were not quite all on the same page kind of get lined up and feel like they could put all their considerable energies into really making success happen in the way they wanted it to.
As you were thinking about helping them before you had the retreat day, what were the challenges that you knew you had to overcome in order to help get them to that place where they were all on the same page?
A lot of it, and this is true often of our clients, a lot of it is sort of jadedness. I mean, often, and I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody, but quite often in my experience, quote-unquote strategic planning is not satisfying. It's too abstract, too theoretical. People don't really leave with a map. They leave with this huge binder that doesn't really help them direct their actions. And so quite often when we do our 2-day vision strategy process, people come in with anywhere from a moderate to high degree of skepticism about what's going to happen here, and they're, I think, pretty much without exception, pleased, in some cases extremely pleased, that at the end they come out with, okay, we're all clear. We're clear on what our vision is. We know what the strategies and tactics are to get there. Let's go do it.
Let's break it down one step further. Knowing that you're going to walk into an environment that is not necessarily receptive, though they want the outcome of what you're there to accomplish. They really want it to succeed.
Yes.
How do you help counter that initial skepticism or jadedness to win them over as quickly as possible so you could get to the productive work rather than people being defensive about, not knowing whether this is something they should get behind because they don't know whether it will succeed?
It's a really good question, and actually my Being Strategic book, the first half of it just goes through the process, and the second half goes through how do you do this with a group, and one of the chapters is about that, is how do you get people seeing the opportunity as such and feeling, if not positive, at least open to it. So almost all of it we try and do beforehand. If it seems like there's going to be a high degree of skepticism, we make sure to talk to people individually beforehand and explain the process to them, even in some cases show them. Some people need to see the outcome. I mean, you can say there's a map and you'll come up with a map. It's very simple. It's an 8 or 10 page document, and they're like, So you have to, we have a couple of templates. It's basically someone's outcomes with the name scrubbed out so they have an example. They can see what it is. And often we also do some diagnostic interviews beforehand, and that really lowers people's skepticism too, because it's very practical. We say, what's working, what's not working, what would you suggest to make it work? So we have a number of ways beforehand of helping open people up, lower the skepticism, and then the process itself is so engaging and so clear and fun that my experience is that generally speaking, any remaining skepticism sort of goes by the wayside within the first couple hours.
I think you mentioned something that is also really important, is that it is fun and engaging. Open your mouth and here comes the medicine. If this is something we're going to draw out of you, what are some of the other benefits of making it fun?
Well, that's how learning happens. I remember I've always felt as though, when people feel powerful and engaged and sort of like, oh, this is my thing, then they can learn. Learning doesn't happen unless people feel like they're having a good time, they're engaged, it's their idea. I remember years ago I read this wonderful thing. I'm not Jewish, so I don't know if this is true or not, but many years ago when kids would go to Hebrew school to learn Hebrew, every time they would learn a new letter, they would get a cake with the shape of the letter on the top as a reward, because learning should be sweet. And, I'm not sure about food as reward and stuff, but the idea that learning should be sweet, I loved that. I took that away. And I feel like that's right. If it's engaging, if it's fun, if it's interesting, then it happens. If it feels like medicine, then it's disciplinary, and that's no fun. And there's so many ways to make learning fun. Sense of humor is really important. Making sure that you're connecting to people's felt needs, making sure that insofar as possible the learning comes from them. You used a phrase before, draw out, and as I'm sure you know, educare means to draw out. To the extent that the person who's helping facilitate or teach understands that the learning arises from inside the learner and is to be drawn out, then that just changes the whole dynamic.
And Erika, when you work with companies like this, and you certainly gain an advantage in doing so, what are some of the trends you're noticing about how companies are going about developing their leaders today?
Well, it's really interesting. I was having a conversation about that about a month ago with a friend of mine who was saying, because our business is just going very well, and he was saying, wow, just such weird economic times. Why do you think that is? And at least from our perspective, it seems as though, and this is reinforced when I talk to the CEOs of my acquaintance, that, when the recession first started in 2009, and then people have kind of, whoever made it through, and it's still kind of rocky. But I think two things happened. One is that a lot of people now are thinking, okay, so that was hard, and we were not set up properly for it, and a lot of it was lack of, all the way back to the beginning of your and my conversation, we were not clear about where we're trying to go. So let's be more planful about our future, to make sure that we can weather whatever's coming up. And so one of the things that means is that people, I think, are much more interested in doing vision and strategy type work than they were 3 or 4 years ago. At least we have much more call for it than we did. And I think that's great. I think people are wanting to be more planful about their businesses, all size businesses, from startup to very, very large. And then the other thing that I think happened in a lot of companies, maybe not all, is that executives realize this whole idea that, people are human capital, our people are our most important asset. I think for a lot of people over the last couple of years, that kind of went from lip service to reality. Senior executives of my acquaintance anyway, I think are more cognizant of the fact that what helped them get through, and what is still helping them get through tough times, is having great people who are really skilled and smart and productive and committed to the enterprise. I noticed that executives are really wanting to support their people. So we're getting a lot more call for individual executive coaching. A lot more people are interested in management development. It just seems like there's more of a recognition that good people are key, and that you want to keep them and develop them and support them. So I think that's a very positive sort of trend that we're seeing.
And as you look out, do you see that trend continuing?
I hope so. I mean, it's hard to tell if any trends are continuing at this point, but, our business seems to keep trending that way, which is great.
What about specific ideas about leadership in this environment? Are people concerned about particular issues more so than others? Are there differences in the last year or two that you've noticed?
Well, I'm an interesting person to ask that question, because I'm just finishing up my third book. I'm just about to send it to my agent, and it's about leadership, and it's focused on the parts of the aspects of leadership that don't change. The working subtitle is Timeless Secrets of True Leadership, and my premise is that people. Well, so let me step back a minute. So my belief is that we are wired as human beings to look for certain characteristics in leaders. I mean, if you think about it, until a couple hundred years ago in human history, it was who you allowed to be your leader, who you really signed up with to be your leader, was a life and death decision. I mean, if you chose badly, you were going to starve to death in the wintertime or be overrun by the invading Genghis Khan or whoever, right? And so I think there's wiring, and it shows up in a lot of fairy tales and folk tales, the king story, the kid who starts out at the beginning and he's poor and he goes through all these circumstances and ends up, marrying the princess, and they all live happily ever after. And you notice in these stories that there is a pattern. There are certain characteristics that kid either has to develop or demonstrate in order to become the worthy leader, in order to become the leader who can marry the princess and live happily ever after, or the prince, And so this new book that I've just written is about that model that we've developed based on that, or what are the characteristics that people look for in leaders. And I really don't think those change much over time. I think, whatever the circumstance, whatever the culture, what people continue to look for these certain elements in people that they will allow to lead them, if you will.
What I was thinking about is how people do think that the environment changes, and there are certain characteristics of leaders that maybe you're born with and maybe some can be learned, because I think there's a skill set that makes people good leaders.
Oh, I think that's exactly right. And I tend to write books in a kind of how-to fashion in a way, and so these 6 leadership qualities that I talk about in my book, in each chapter I talk about, well, how can you, if you feel like you're not strong in this quality, how can you develop it? The leadership characteristics or attributes that I talk about are farsighted, which means that you can articulate a compelling and inclusive vision of the future, which goes back to our earlier conversation. Passionate, which means, it doesn't mean loudness, it means depth of commitment, that people can see that you are deeply committed to the enterprise, that you're not going to wander away in the midst of the difficult times. Courageous, which means both that you can make difficult decisions quickly when that's necessary, but it also means that you're willing to do things that are personally uncomfortable for you for the good of the enterprise. If people see that you will go beyond your personal comfort for the good of the enterprise, that's an important signal to them that you will be an effective leader. The 4th one is wise, that you reflect on your own experience, that you are open to that you learn from mistakes, that you're willing to acknowledge your mistakes and grow from them. Next one is generous, that you're generous with intent, with praise, with hope, with resources, with knowledge, with wisdom, with authority, with all those things. And finally, trustworthy. People need to know that they can rely on you to both act as you say you will and to do the job. They need to be able to trust your competence. So I think those are pretty universal, and I don't think they change much over time. But I do think they can be learned. I think you can improve in all those.
Those are good aspects for leaders. What about someone who wants to become a leader within an organization? And in addition to knowing that they have the desire to be a leader, what else should they be doing in order to help accelerate their progress within an organization?
Well, that's a complex question. There's kind of working on themselves, becoming, which, what I've just spoken about, becoming the kind of leader that other people will follow, that other people will sign up for, is how I think of it. But then there's also the kind of political aspects of it. What do you do to accelerate your move through an organization? And we have a course that we teach a colleague and I called Politics, Power, and Influence, and it's about a kind of high integrity way to make your way through an organization. We define politics in a sort of value neutral way. We define it as the web of influence and power through which you need to navigate to reach your goals. And you can do that in a high integrity way or a non-high integrity way, and we encourage people to do it in a high integrity way. So a lot of that is figuring out, and this is stuff I learned from Peter Block, one of my early employers, was to figure out in the organization who are your allies, who are your adversaries, and who are your fence sitters. And then strengthen your allies and see if fence sitters are people who don't have a strong feeling about you one way or the other. And there are, you want to build your allies and strengthen those relationships of mutual benefit. And then if there is someone who you need to be an ally who's a fence sitter, then, you try to convert them. You try and find areas where you both want to succeed and where you have common hopes and, build trust and build agreement with those people. And then adversaries, usually what people try and do is convert their adversaries. That's unlikely, but at least you can neutralize them usually and make them into fence sitters. So I think there's both the personal, what do I have to do to evolve my leadership attributes, my job skills, my capabilities, and then you have to be realistic about the environment you find yourself in too, and find ways to create allies who will help you move through that environment.
Erika, you started and have grown a business. And as you look back on Proteus over the years, what are a couple milestones that you've encountered or noticed that let you know and have a greater sense of confidence that your business was going to succeed at a higher level?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I always, maybe to too great an extent, have been confident that the business was going to succeed and grow. That's never been a problem for me. But I can look at sort of inflection points that I knew at the time or shortly afterwards were, wow, this is going to make a big difference to the business. And one was when I started the business in 1990, I had a partner for 3 or 4 years who was a sort of mentor to me and very helpful to get it off the ground. But then I bought him out and ran it myself for 6 or 7 years. But then in 2000, I connected up with my current business partner, Jeff Mitchell, who was just wonderful and had been a friend of mine for many years. And I knew that as soon as Jeff and I connected and he bought into the business, it was going to rise to a whole different level. We really love each other and see some core things the same, but he brings a whole different skill set and his brain works in a whole different way. So I knew that was going to be a 1 + 1 = 11 kind of thing. And then the second big inflection point was when my first book got published at the end of 2006. That really shifts things when you have a book published by, and it does well and gets reviewed well and is published by a major publisher. That really shifts the landscape. People really see you differently, and that was a really helpful door opener in lots of ways. And then the third one was over the last couple of years, a couple of very senior clients of ours have come and joined the company, and they have been just extraordinarily helpful to us. They're very senior people where they were in their companies before, and that's really, really helped us a lot and kind of strengthened the company and put us on a path to even more growth and helping people. So when I think about the inflection points, those are the 3 things I think about.
As you think back on the first one, you'd been running the company on your own for several years, and then you decided, and probably through conversation with Jeff, thought this would be a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. How exciting was you when you guys had that decision and said, yes, let's do it?
It was really exciting, and I think we went about it in a really good way. Both of us realized, had it been in various business partnerships before, and both of us realized what an important thing it is to choose well and to make sure that you're really well suited to be business partners. So we did something that I think is very smart in retrospect. We decided to work on a project before we committed to becoming partners to see if our styles were as we had hoped. They would be complementary, and if we brought different things to the party, and if we could work well together. And it was a really good project. We really enjoyed working with each other. We saw how our experience and the way our brains were wired kind of complemented each other. So, once we had gone through that project and said, yeah, let's do it, we had a pretty high degree of confidence that it would be a good partnership and that we'd enjoy working together, which we have. I mean, sometimes we butt heads, and I think any 2 people do, but every day we're glad to have each other as our partners, which is wonderful.
Gosh, that so reminds me of what we talked about earlier, Erika, where you said you could make decisions that help move you in the direction of your hoped-for future. You actually gave it a trial where you said, okay, this is what we hope will happen. Let's make decisions and work together side by side and see if this works out as well as we both hope it will.
That's exactly right. And we have made a practice, and I think this is one of the things that has made us successful as an organization. We are really rigorous about practicing what we preach, or eating our own caviar, as my friend and partner Jeff would say. We use our own vision strategy process. We coach each other. We do all the things that we say other people should do. In fact, we quite often beta test stuff on ourselves. We really make sure that we are lined up with what we say we want other people to do. And there's a story. Actually, I tell this story in this most recent book I've just written. Supposedly Mahatma Gandhi, when he was running India, he was also, not only was he the head of the government, but he was seen as a spiritual leader, and so people would come and ask him for blessings. And one day this woman and her little boy came and got in line and got up to the head of the line, I guess, and she said, Mahatmaji, my son is eating way too much sugar and it's really bad for him, and I know if you tell him to stop or to cut down, he will. And Gandhi said, okay, but would you mind coming back in a couple of weeks? And she said, okay. So she goes away and she comes back, gets in line again, comes to the head of the line and says, Mahatmaji, I don't know if you remember me. This is me, my son. I asked about the sugar and you told. And Gandhi turns to the boy and says, son, eating too much sugar is really bad for you, and you should really seriously cut down. You should just eat sweets very sparingly. And he goes, okay, Mahatmaji, I'll do that. And the mom is puzzled, and she says, so, Gandhiji, I don't understand why you couldn't tell him that same thing 2 weeks ago. And Gandhi said, well, first I had to stop eating sugar. And I love that story. It's about just being authentic. You can't. it's not okay to tell other people to do things that you yourself are not doing, and that's kind of how we've always tried to run our business.
That's a great example that embodies so much of what we discussed and how you help your clients week in and week out. Erika, thank you so much for joining us on My Quest for the Best. You've reminded us of the importance of looking back and recognizing the important points that change our business and change the direction of our lives, and about making important decisions and choices that move you towards your hoped-for future, and helped us give us some excitement and interest in becoming better leaders through talking about some of the skill sets that are necessary for doing that. You've enriched our time talking with you and listening to your wisdom and sharing your experience with us, and have made learning sweet for us today. So, Erika, thank you so much.
Oh, and thank you. And I don't know if you have this on your website. I suppose you do, but I'd love anyone who's been interested in this conversation. You know, I have a personal website, erikaandersen.com, which I'd love to have you come and see. I blog there, and there's an insiders list. I send out, newsletters twice a month, and just love to have you in the conversation. So thank you.